In a sense, judging is like creating a law or a rule, which then your mind stores. And then that law or rule, of course, gets applied to all future situations because your mind tries to stay consistent, tries to maintain integrity with itself. So if you judge a fat person here, then if you ever become fat, you're going to be judging yourself. If you judge a slutty person over there, if you ever do anything slutty, you're going to be judging yourself. If you judge rich people, anytime you make a little extra money, you're going to be judging yourself. You're going to feel guilt, you're going to feel shame, you're going to feel inadequacy, or some other kind of like low consciousness, nasty type of emotion. Another good example that I like is those panhandlers on the street. You ever seen some of those bums, those dirty bums on the street? It's really easy to judge those guys, right? So they're standing on the street begging you for a quarter. And of course, you know, sometimes you give them a quarter, but sometimes you don't. And in fact, you say something like, man, look at this guy. Why doesn't he just like clean himself up and go get a job at McDonald's at least? He could earn more money than just standing here like a pathetic slob. I bet this guy's lazy. He's such a lazy bum. And then every time you see a bum, you call him lazy. Now, 5 years later, it backfires on you. How does it backfire on you? Because let's say you're working on some project in your business. And maybe your partner tells you, hey, man, you've been slacking, you're lazy. And all of a sudden, now you start to get kind of frantic and neurotic. And even though you're working 50 or 60 hours a week, just because your business partner called you lazy, you didn't take it as a joke. You actually took it seriously. And now you're like, well, shit, I should work even harder. He's right. I should work 80 hours a week. And so what you do is you kill yourself for the next 3 years working 80 hours a week, burn yourself out, make yourself sick, deny yourself the other pleasures of life, estrange yourself from your family, and maybe your relationship goes bad, maybe your marriage gets divorced, and all of that simply because you were reacting against your judgment of not wanting to be lazy, because you call those people lazy, and of course that's a rule that you created in your mind, which said lazy is bad, which of course means that anytime I get even close to lazy, or I even inch my way towards lazy, I'm all of a sudden bad. Creates a lot of problems. And the last example I want to give you is the unloving mother example, which is a really great one that I love. Let's say that in this example, you're the woman, and you were a girl and you grew up with a mother that didn't give you a lot of affection, criticized you all the time, wasn't loving enough. And this really hurt you, and you had a really kind of like troublesome teenage years, and because you feel like you weren't getting enough love. So you judged that as bad. And then you told yourself, you know what, when I have kids, I'm going to be the most loving mother ever because my mother was a selfish bitch, and I'm not going to be that way with my kids. And that seems like a very positive rule to make in your mind, right? Be more loving, be more selfless. How great is that? What could possibly go wrong? Well, except 20 years later, when you do have your own kids, what happens? Well, now you need to play that role of the selfless mother. And so now you sacrifice yourself for your kids. Your kids walk all over you. You do everything for your kids. You don't take any time for yourself. You don't take care of your health. You don't take care of your psychological needs. So you grow fat and you go psychologically neurotic slowly over the years as you're sacrificing yourself to your kids, and your kids become more and more ungrateful little brats. And then the same thing now happens with your husband as well. And your whole family situation just goes to hell. And maybe eventually you get a divorce. And you grow sick with cancer. Why does all this happen? Well, I'm not saying this is the only cause, but one possible cause for why something like this would happen is because you set down this law very early in your childhood that told you, I will never be selfish like my mother. I will never be unloving like her. Even though, you know what? Sometimes it's okay to be selfish. Sometimes you need that. Sometimes you need to take a vacation. Sometimes you need to do something for yourself at the expense of your kids. And that can be normal and healthy. But you don't allow yourself to do that because you've just been so harsh and judgmental on your mother about that. And for you now to go back on your old promises and your old laws and rules, Well, that means you have to change how your whole mind works. And notice that in this example, you would not be aware of how all this stuff is happening. You'd be having problems in your family and with your kids, but you wouldn't know why it's happening. You would never connect the dots all the way back to some innocent seeming little judgment that you made 20 years ago. So just notice how subtle it can be. Those are just some examples. It's just the tip of the iceberg. I just wanted to use these examples to kind of get your mind jogging and to start to connect the dots in your own life. For you, these examples might be totally different than what I talked about here. Get kind of creative, start thinking, how is this working in my life? Fundamentally, the problem here in all these examples is that you're disowning a part of reality. You're creating these rigid rules by which now you have to live. And whenever you break one of these rules, and these rules, by the way, they're very arbitrary, totally arbitrary, that now you feel like, well, shit, I can't break these rules. I have to live by all these rules. I have to jump through all these hoops. I have to be the perfect person. I have to stay consistent with all my past judgments. I can't admit that I was wrong. And so because of this, you block off a lot of avenues within reality. Now you can't take a vacation. Now you can't be a little bit lazy. Now you can't be rich. Now you can't be a newbie at something. Now you can't be sexual. Now you can't gain a little bit of weight, and so on and so on and so on. And what this does is it makes you inflexible in life. You're not able to flow with the circumstances of life. You're not able to be spontaneous in life. And this creates problems for you. Creates guilt, creates shame. And largely, you don't know this is going on. It's just going on. To you, it feels like, man, my life feels miserable. Why do I feel guilty all the time? Why do I feel shameful all the time? Why do I feel unsatisfied all the time? Why do I feel like I can't do anything right all the time? Why do I keep self-sabotaging? Every relationship, every new business, every new hobby that I start just doesn't seem to work for me. Well, maybe it's because you made some judgments that are holding you back and that have just backfired on you again and again and again. Here's one of my personal biggest insights that I've had this year from doing a lot of enlightenment work and consciousness work in workshops. One of the biggest insights I had was this, was that the reason that I've been a people pleaser for most of my life until recently is because, and I trace this back into my past, is I recognize that, I used to judge my dad for being inconsiderate towards other people, what I perceived as inconsiderate. And I kind of thought of him as a jerk. And I said to myself, you know what? When I grow up, I don't want to be that kind of man. I don't want to be the jerk. I don't want to be the inconsiderate one. I want to be the kind, the nice one. And so that sealed my fate. Now, whenever I interacted with people for decades after making that judgment, I would always try to be the nice one because I would subconsciously be running away from that negative ideal that my dad set. And I didn't just judge my dad as being inconsiderate. I also judged other people as being inconsiderate. So it was a combination of various judgments. But basically, that created this kind of people-pleasing personality profile for me. And it just kind of fired and fired and fired. And I didn't know why it was happening. Only years later, after lots and lots and lots of consciousness work, did I finally stumble upon, by accident, this discovery that, of course, I made that judgment when I was real young. And it's hung around with me and it's stuck around for decades. And I've been paying the price. And I didn't know what was going on there. Because you know what? Sometimes in life, you got to be inconsiderate. You might wonder, like, well, Leo, yeah, of course, you don't want to be inconsiderate. What's wrong with that law? What's wrong with that judgment? But the fact is that sometimes you are inconsiderate in life. Sometimes you do have to be a dick. Sometimes you can't help it. Especially like in business or in some kind of negotiation situation or in a relationship where you have to break off the relationship when you know it's good for both of you to break it off. But you don't because you're just so used to being a people pleaser and you don't want to disappoint somebody or be perceived as a jerk. Right? You need that flexibility. And I denied that to myself. So that created some problems for me. All right, so how do we get you to recognize this kind of stuff for yourself, these kind of deep insights? Well, I got a great exercise for you. which is actually the exercise that I use to discover this insight for myself. So here it is. So that's your exercise, that's your assignment. Now, to just recap this topic, we started off asking the question, how do you stop judging yourself? Well, one way that you stop judging yourself is basically, this is the answer in a nutshell, is that you stop judging other people. You cannot stop judging yourself if you continue to judge other people. Hopefully you can now see the dynamic where this is a double-edged sword. It cuts both ways. It cuts forward and it cuts backwards. So be very careful. And you might wonder, well, how do I stop judging other people, Leo? And here's my answer to that. First of all, be mindful of how you judge other people. Judgments are usually much more subtle than we think. It's usually not as black and white as, oh, she's fat, or oh, he's an asshole. I mean, those are very obvious. Also, be very mindful of the jokes you make with your friends, with your circle of friends, how you like to make jokes about others at the expense of others. And in that case, you're judging them. Be very careful about that. Just be more mindful of how often you do judge people. You do it a lot more often than you think. And this takes a period of increased awareness to start to see this. Also, be more mindful of how your judgments are damaging you. So you can see how they're damaging other people, but then see the second side of the blade pointing back at you, right? When you slice with it. So this is what we mean by double-edged sword. So notice, for example, that when you judge fat people, that makes you insecure about your own weight. Notice that when you judge rich people, that creates a problem for you with money. Notice that when you judge slutty people, that creates a problem for you in the bedroom with sexuality. Notice these things, right? Notice the actual limits, kind of the cage that you construct around yourself. Notice that. Again, that takes a period of mindfulness. It takes a while to see that. And, to jumpstart you and to help you to do that right now, do the exercise. Create both of these lists, sit down, really think about it. After you do the exercise, what you'll notice for the next week or so, you'll be walking around town with your friends and all this kind of stuff. You're going to be more mindful automatically to the different judgments you make. And then you can go deeper with it and you can take a look at those judgments that you put a star next to, the ones that already are backfiring on you, and you can work on those even deeper. And I don't really have time to go into that. I'll probably cover that in some other episode. But that's it for now. So practice the mindfulness, see what's really going on, how you're using these judgments against yourself, and do this exercise. All right, that's it. I'm signing off. Please click the like button for me.